Hello, and thank you for choosing to hit the play button on this video. My name is Nicole, and I'm part of the team at English Central. English Central, as you may or may not be aware, is a distributor of ESL materials in Canada and the United States. One of our publishers, Helbling Languages, recently published a series called Jetstream. I'm going to go over a few little details, and then after that I'm going to hand the mic over to Jeremy Harmer, who is one of the authors of this course. He's also incredibly interesting to listen to, so I hope you'll bear with my introductions if you find them dull, because Jeremy will undoubtedly make up for it later. Jeremy probably doesn't need an introduction, but I will say a few words anyway, because it would be rude not to. This is Jeremy. Hi, Jeremy. Jeremy is best known for his methodology books, including The Practice of English Language Teaching and How to Teach English. However, Jeremy has also written some student books where he puts his extensive theoretical knowledge into practice. The most recent one is, as mentioned earlier, Jetstream. Jetstream is an integrated skills general English course with 6 levels, from beginner to advanced. It was first published in British English, but now an American Jetstream is available. I have been in the ESL book business for 14 years, and I've seen a lot of different books come and go over the years. I'm very excited about American Jetstream for 6 specific reasons. Firstly, interesting topics. Most course books cover the same topics over and over again, mostly because there's a limited number of things that you can talk about. But what's great with Jetstream is that they put a very unfamiliar or a different spin on, the typical topics that get covered. So housing, for example, becomes living off the grid. There's also this really neat feature called language in action videos, and so these are videos of people interacting in very normal, everyday kind of situations. And all of this lovely functional language is pulled out of the context, and students can see 2 people interacting and using this useful language. There's also a lot of work on thinking skills and memory. I know Jeremy's going to talk about that, so I won't talk too much about it. There's also a cross-culture feature where students are encouraged to look at different, aspects of their cultural attitudes and compare, and therefore become more aware of what these differences are. There's the Explore Online feature, which again Jeremy is going to go into much more extensively, so I'll keep tuned for that one. And then finally there's the E-Zone. So there's a very robust online component or digital component that underlies Jetstream, which allows students access to all the audio and all sorts of extra exercises and practice and homework and so forth. So now that I've gone over these quick little details, I am going to hand the mic over to Jeremy.
It's about a book called Jetstream, which is a 6-level course, and I've co-written a couple of the levels in the course, and I've had the most fantastic time doing it, and I've really enjoyed it. So what I thought I'd do, with your permission, actually without your permission, what I thought I'd do is just take you through some of the features of the book, so that in about 40 minutes or so, maybe less, you'll have an idea of what the book feels like and what it's got in it. Let's get going. So here's a picture which quite clearly shows what's going on. The set is made out of cardboard. The coffee isn't real, etc., etc. But what it is, it's a dialogue between the woman and the man in which she is paying him ridiculously over-the-top compliments, and he's rather embarrassed by it. And it's quite funny. It makes students laugh. Why do we do it? Well, because in the old tradition, this is an old tradition of English language teaching, we think that when you present material in dialogue form, it's really useful for students to pick up functional language, lexical phrases, lexical chunks, and things like that. So in this case, once they've listened to the video and watched it, they get this, which is where they have to look at phrases from the conversation and say whether they're compliments or responses to a compliment, and then they have to decide who said these things. So, for example, do you think so? Obviously isn't a compliment, it's a response to a compliment. But you're amazing, you're great, you're just incredible, you deserve a real pat on the back, you rock, you've made my day. These are all compliments. As I say, the humor of the situation arises because the woman is way over the top and he's uncomfortable. So there you are, a dialogue to introduce students to the language of compliments and responding to compliments. And it's been going on for years, that kind of thing. And we have it in Jetstream. It's in the section that Nicole mentioned earlier called Language in Action. But if that's all there was in Jetstream, we'd be seriously worried. Why do I say that? Well, because there was a time, quite a long time ago, when dialogues like this were just about everything you found in a course book. Everything was based on dialogues. There was a reason for that. They're good fun, they're useful. But you can't have a book that does just that, especially in 2016. Especially in 2016, or 2017, 2018, 20, whatever it is. Because the world has changed. And we live in a connected world, a world with information all around us, and a world in which students can navigate and travel without any trouble at all through digital means and so on. So a modern course has to have more than that. Here goes. That's a question for you if you're watching this, but I'm going to lead you through part of a unit on music to give you an idea of what Jetstream's like. And if you were a group of students, then this is how we'd start. I'd say I'd put you in pairs, maybe in groups of 3 or, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5. And the question is, how important is music in your life? Why? Well, because everybody has a relationship with music. Music is all around us. And whether you hate it, whether you love it, whether you play it, whether you just listen to it, whether you're indifferent to it, everyone has some kind of relationship to music. But this is the first thing that we get students to talk about. Why? Because we believe quite profoundly that the most important thing that students bring into the classroom is themselves, their feelings, their thoughts, their personalities, their prejudices, well, hopefully not too many prejudices, but their likes and their dislikes and so on and so forth. So we always start, pretty much always start, with something we call you first. How important is music in your life? And they talk about music and they discuss it. And then we ask them to report back on their conversations. By the way, this may be some of the most important language work you do in the whole lesson, in the whole 2 or 3 or 4 lessons, because this is where students are trying to express themselves and we have the opportunity to intervene and help them do it better. Then let's move on. Here's a little thing. Here's a bunch of musical instruments, and as you're looking at this, I imagine most of you know what most of these instruments are. But maybe there are 1 or 2 there that you're not so sure of. That makes you just like students. And of course, what I could do is I could tell you what these instruments are. We could go through them one by one. I could show you pictures and things like that. But this is 2016. Students have dictionaries. An awful lot of them have dictionaries on their cell phones or in some very accessible form like that. So what I say to students is, here's a group of musical instruments. If there are any musical instruments here that you don't know, look them up or ask your neighbor. In other words, pass some of the responsibility for this over to them. Make what we're doing not just something that the teacher tells the students, but that we say to the students, you go and find these words. Find the words you don't know. And in that finding, we're giving them yet another nudge towards some kind of learner autonomy, another nudge, another provocation, another temptation for them to be in charge of their own learning. So now they've done it. They know what all the instruments are. Now we say to them, okay, choose one of these instruments. Don't tell your neighbor which instrument it is. Now, mime playing one of these instruments. Can your neighbor guess what it is? It's a silly activity, but it's good fun. And what it absolutely ensures is that most students will remember at least 1 or maybe 2 or 3 instruments, and they won't forget them. Why do they need these instruments? Well, they don't need all of them. Well, yes, they need most of them. Why do they need these instruments? Because the next thing that happens to them is they see a picture of 6 people. Well, of course, that's mathematically incorrect, because you'll have noticed there are 7 people. So what I should have said is 6 musical acts. And we say to them, do you know who any of these are? And there's a good chance that they won't know who any of these people are. As a matter of fact, these are their names. And I don't know if you who are watching this webinar know who any of these people are. We try and get students to predict what instruments they think these people might play, because they are all, we tell them, They are all world-class instrumentalists. I mean, seriously world-class instrumentalists. And they have to try and guess what instrument they play and where they come from. But we don't spend much time on that kind of prediction because you can't predict. If you don't know, if you have no idea, you can't predict. So you don't spend hours and hours. It's just something to kind of spice up the opening of this little part of the activity and give students a sort of tweak to get them going. And then they do something that students have been doing for decades. We play them an audio which tells them who these people are. For example, Yujia Wang is one of the best pianists in the world. She's from China. She's 29 years old now. She's extremely well known for her brilliant playing and her extraordinary and often very minimal clothing on the platform, which causes excitement and controversy in the world of classical music. She's one of the best classical music players in the world. Anushka Shankar under her is the daughter of the famous Ravi Shankar, the great Indian sitar player, but actually she has established herself in her own right as the best sitar player in the world. Courtney Pine, he's a British jazz musician, plays the saxophone and the bass clarinet, amazing. Hilary Hahn up there on the top right, well, she's an American classical violinist. She made the most sensational CD of unaccompanied Bach when she was only 15 years old. How is that possible? Rodrigo y Gabriela, an incredibly famous Mexican guitar duo. Their story is really interesting. I hope that doesn't get in the way, the ambulance siren going past. Their story is amazing because they were living in Mexico City and then they just went off to Ireland with not a single word of English and 2 guitars. And by the time they'd finished, they'd become incredibly famous at playing their 2 guitars, and they spoke English really well. And now they play in music festivals all over the world. It's a kind of unique rock music with just 2 guitars playing with each other. And Toumani Diabaté is from Senegal, and he's a kora player. Now, so there you are. Interesting? Well, mildly interesting. You might be interested, but not super interesting. But here's the thing. And this is really, really important for me. In the past, you could tell students pretty much anything. And even if it wasn't particularly true, they probably wouldn't know. But now they can know, and they do know, because the moment you excite their interest about something, they'll Google it. They'll go online and find out if it's true or not. The days of us telling tall tales, telling stories are over. Because if students are even remotely interested in what you told them about, they're going to go and check it out online. So we'd better make sure that when we're authentic, we're authentic. Let me explain. When you saw that little picture of the woman paying compliments to the man, it was obviously fake. The scenery was made out of cardboard. And so we say, that's fake, enjoy. But here we're saying, this is real, and it is real, and the students are going to go and look for these people if they're interested. Actually, I'd go further than that. I want them to go and look at these people. This is the page from the book, by the way. My feeling is that if students are remotely interested in the topic we're doing, we should say to them, okay, take a few minutes of class time and actually go and look. So in other words, if you look at these musicians here, choose the one that sounds the most interesting to you, put some headphones on, hopefully they've all got their headphones with them, put some headphones on, here they are, and go to YouTube and find one of the people you've chosen and listen to 2 minutes of what they're playing. Then take off your headphones. What do you think? Do you like their music or don't you like their music? And you know what that does? It absolutely tells the students that we are in the real world. We're not in some kind of bizarre English language teaching world. You'll see that we mean business. You probably can't see on the screen at the moment. We'll come back to it in a minute. By something you can see at the bottom of the screen, which says the orange with red, which says Explore Online. We encourage students in lessons, outside lessons, to actually go online if they can and follow up what we're talking about. And then we get them up and we say to students, everybody up. We like to get students standing up in the class, mingling with each other, letting a bit of blood flow through their bodies, not just sitting there for 50 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. We get people up. And then we ask students to, as you can see, find people who can or could play a musical instrument. When they started, when and where they play and practice, what instrument they would like to play if they had a chance to learn. And you know what? It never fails, because everyone has an instrument they either can play or would love to play, especially they would love to play. And you know, when they're moving around and talking to each other, real communication takes place. For the teacher, it's a goldmine of opportunity and possibility, because we can go around and listen to them, interact with them, work out what's causing them problems, and so on and so forth. I mentioned Explore Online. Well, here we are. The whole point about Explore Online is that we say to students, we're dealing with the real world, English in the real world. So this is 2016, or depending on when you watch this, 17, 18, 19, 20, I don't know. But once upon a time, you could keep students within the covers of a course book. Everything could happen within the covers of a course book. Well, it can't anymore. It absolutely can't. We live in a connected world. And I think we should celebrate that and make something of it. So that whole lesson you've just seen was all about getting students really engaged and hooked into the topic and the content and music and so on, and giving them something to really talk about. Because if students really communicate with us and with each other, the language almost comes by itself. But I can sense that you may not be very comfortable with that. So let's see what happens if we go a little bit further. Here's a picture. And we show this to students and say, what can you see? And it's not entirely clear. Here's another picture. Here's a man on a vast garbage dump somewhere. And here's another picture. And here we have 3 kids playing musical instruments, which appear to be made out of tin cans. And finally, students see a headline. The world sends us garbage, we send back music. And we say, what do you think this is all about? Can you predict, can you guess what this is all about? And this time, by the way, they do have a good chance of predicting what it's all about, so it's worth spending more time. Because the clues are fairly strong, and I'm pretty certain that watching this, you have some idea of what's going on. But what they get, actually, is this text. And they just look at the pictures, and they see the headline, the world sends us their garbage, we send back music. I'll tell you very briefly what the story is, because the text's a bit small. But there's a village called Cateura, a town, almost a city, called Cateura in Paraguay. And the only problem about Cateura is it's one great, big, huge rubbish dump. That's where the whole country of Paraguay sends its rubbish. And from what I've seen, from the videos I've seen, it doesn't look like a very nice place, to be honest. I'm not sure I want to go visit. A lot of poverty, it's not a nice place. But there was a guy called Suarez, and he was going around the country playing music to kids to try and encourage kids to learn music. And he went all over Paraguay. And one day he got to Cateura, and the kids listened to his orchestra, whatever it was, playing beautiful music. And they got really excited. And they said, wow, we'd like to do that. The only problem, of course, is that they didn't have any instruments. And then the problem, of course, was they couldn't possibly afford any instruments. So this lovely idea they'd been given, which was, oh, we'd love to play music, was a pipe dream for them. No chance it could come about. Until one of his name wasn't Suarez, by the way, his name was Saran. Until one of Saran's friends went along to see Cola. That's the guy in the top right photograph who works in the rubbish dump. And what he does in the garbage dump, what he does is he recycles stuff. And so this guy says to him, could you make a violin out of trash, out of garbage? And the guy says, well, I don't know, what's a violin? He says, he brings him a violin to look at. The guy measures it, discusses it, understands it. And he makes a violin out of a baking tray, an old baking tray. He uses bits of hairbrushes for the pegs. Then he makes flutes out of old piping, and he uses little moneditas, little coins for the keys. And then he makes, as you can see in the picture at the bottom, he makes cellos out of oil drums, or double basses out of big, big oil drums. And pretty soon he's got a little orchestra of kids who play music. And they're not bad, you know. And they call themselves the Orquesta de Instrumentos Reciclados de Categoría Paraguay, or the Recycled Orchestra in English, or the Landfill Philharmonic. And people start getting to know about them. They start traveling around Paraguay. Then they start traveling around the world. They've played in the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam, which is one of the most famous concert halls ever. They accompanied Metallica, the heavy metal rock, on a tour around Latin America, you know, being watched by 120,000 people. Wow, what a thing. So that's the story of Categoría and of the Recycled Orchestra. Here's the last paragraph. It says, now people all over the world know about the Recycled Orchestra. They're sending new musical instruments to the kids of Categoría so they don't have to play with rubbish anymore. That's a good thing, isn't it? And actually, it's a bit of an issue. These kids have become famous for making music out of garbage. They're special, they're unique. But if they now start playing on ordinary instruments, they'd lose that uniqueness, they'd lose that. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. Why am I telling you all this? Well, because I want my students, this is at the intermediate level, I want my students to have something interesting to talk about. And this is quite an interesting issue. Will the conversation take off? I don't know. But if it does take off, if they start giving their opinions about this, if they're thinking, we know that when students are cognitively engaged with what's going on, and on top of that, emotionally engaged with what's going on, they're in a much better place to learn. Of course, you'll find in Jetstream, in the book, you'll find reading activities that are very familiar. So if you look there, two things I want to draw your attention to. First one, I don't know if you can read it. It's got a little symbol of a head with a cross in it, and it says, how many words for musical instruments can you remember? And for us, that's myself and my co-authors, especially Jane Ravel, who is one of the original authors. Memory is absolutely vital. If you want to be a good language learner, you have to train your memory. Be good at remembering. Be good at working out how to remember stuff. And there we are, straight away saying, you know, we did that thing before about the people around the world who play fantastic instruments and so on. Can you remember the words? And so on. Then we have guessing, which is a brain activity. Look at the title of the article and photos. What do you think the story is about? We did that already. Now we have reading the article to correct your predictions, and then finding some words in the text. And now you have to choose two of these words to talk about. Give as much information as you can in brackets. We like the idea as often as possible in giving the students a chance to choose what they do. So you don't have to answer all 6 questions, all 6 topics, just choose 2 of them, the ones that interest you. But this is where it gets powerful for us. There's that symbol again. Do you remember? It's a symbol about memory. And what we want our students to do is to close the book and retell the story. And maybe retell it again and again and again. Why? Because every time you retell it, you re-signify it, you give it new meaning. You have to go back into your mind to remember the words, the terms, the information. And we know that memory is a key part of language learning. Of course, there's grammar, there's bound to be grammar, but even here, we're asking the students to think about it. We're not telling them. So complete the sentences in the table by looking at the text, and then which verbs refer to this, which verbs refer to that, getting them to think about the grammar. And then they do a grammar exercise. Of course, we have vocabulary as well, which is all about, in this case, different words for rubbish and so on and so forth. But so, as with every course, you'll find grammar work and vocabulary work. But there's another kind of language too. And this is really, really important to us because it mirrors what we think about how students learn and the rather random and beautiful way that students learn when they're engaged. So here is a paragraph from the text. It says, Louis Saran is a conductor, blah, 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 blah. Let's make it a bit bigger so you can see it. Here we are. He went to Kateora, everyone wanted to try it. That's when this guy who worked with Louis Saran, you know what? Suddenly he had a brainwave. Suddenly he had a brainwave. Isn't that amazing? It's a fantastically good English expression. I had a brainwave. Oh, he had a brainwave. She had a brainwave. And what it means is, boom, the light goes on in your head. What a fantastic piece of English. If your students could say to one of their English-speaking friends or colleagues, I've had a brainwave, wouldn't that be fantastic? And it's exactly the kind of language that students themselves latch onto and pick up. And if we spend too much time teaching vocabulary and grammar, bashing students over the head with grammar, we may, a bit like horses, old-fashioned horses, blinker them to the wonderful richness of language around them. Every text you ever read is like a gold mine and you can dig out the gold. We actually draw their attention to this kind of language. We call it suitcase language because it's exactly the kind of language that students pick up. They say, oh, I like that. He had a brainwave. I like that. They put it in their suitcase and take it away with them. And so we encourage them to be that kind of, those kind of, what would you call it? Language stealers, language miners, language, whatever it is, to pick up useful language. Not just, in other words, what I'm saying is not just the vocabulary and grammar. And that's it. By the way, we said that retelling stories is really important. Retelling the story of Kateora and the dump and things like that. There are lots and lots of ways you can get students to retell things. We could get them, for example, to be a reporter and write the story of Kateora. We could get them to pretend that they're one of the kids in the orchestra and be interviewed by the TV station. We get them to role play, in other words. Lots and lots of ways of retelling and repeating the story. So that's given you a kind of flavor. My topic was music, and of course, Jetstream isn't about music. It's about music once, so there's a couple of mentions of music throughout the series, but I chose it because it's a subject dear to my heart. What are the main pedagogic procedures in Jetstream that I've tried to exemplify, and one or two which I haven't mentioned? Well, the first is that we believe profoundly that students bring themselves to the lesson, and getting them first, before anything else, to talk about what they feel, how interested they are, what's going on. That's absolutely vital if you want genuine student engagement. In the same way, as I've already suggested, we think that getting students up, standing up in the class, moving around in the class, exchanging information and opinions is absolutely vital and creates a good class atmosphere and gives the student absolutely wonderful evidence to base decisions on. We're absolutely committed to the idea that students who are cognitively engaged in the process of learning and in the classroom and in what's going on around them are much better learners than students who are kind of just sitting there taking it all in a kind of rather relaxed way. So yes, we do get them to guess what's coming up. We do get them to guess what's happening, guess answers, guess this, that, and the other. We do get them, as often as possible, to think critically. And I'm sure you're aware of all the emphasis that's been placed in the last few years on critical thinking. What does critical thinking mean? It just means exercising your brain and thinking about why and how, instead of all the time just thinking what. And we try and provoke that in lots of ways. The example I gave you was the one about trying to decide whether the offering the recycled orchestra instruments that have been only once cycled, well, never have been cycled, whether that's a good thing. And the really crucial one is that little symbol of the head with a cross in it, memory. Memory, memory, memory. Jetstream spends a lot of time saying to students, try and remember, excuse me, try and remember, remember what you heard, remember what you said, remember what the story was. Of course, we want students to talk. It's absolutely vital. So role play is a way of doing that. As I said, get someone to role play one of the kids from Catheora, or get students to role play the guy who works in the rubbish dump making violins. Crucially, we have mini talks where students have to prepare a little mini presentation and speak to their class. We believe that when you do that, you think and prepare with more care than you ever do if you're just answering display questions from the teacher, for example. Because if you're going to have to stand up in front of the class, you want to do it as well as possible. And we'll come back to that in a second. And then, vitally, we get students to tell their own stories. You might want to call that personalization, I suppose, because student stories really matter. I've talked about suitcase language, trying to get students to love little chunks of language so much that they're just going to put them in their suitcase and take them away. And if we can get them to love language like that, we're on a roll. And our job as teachers has been not done, but is the start of a real sense of progress is there. And then there are two other features, one of which I've mentioned and one of which I haven't. One is the whole issue of exploring online. Saying to students, you know what? This book, this material, this lesson is about the real world. Yeah, we can have a bit of fantasy, a bit of fun, and we'll show you when it's fun and fantasy, because, for example, the scenery will be made out of cardboard and the people will be obviously play acting. But the rest of the time, in the world we live in, a bit of authenticity does a lot of good. And in particular, in a world where content and language integrated learning, or content-based instruction, as you may know it, is such a huge movement. The content has to be good. And if the content's good, no, let's do this in the right order. The content has to be authentic, unless you clearly say it's not. Authentic content has to be good and interesting. If authentic content is good and interesting, students will want to explore online and find out more about it. And we encourage that. We don't say, ooh, we say, we want you to do that. Because if a student is so interested in the topic that they go off and head off and they get to an English language site and spend their time trying to understand in video or on some website what's going on, we've really scored a major success. And the last thing there, I haven't talked about at all yet, is what we call a video option. Some years ago, I was listening to a teacher from Argentina talking about how she got her students to blog online or upload little mini films they'd made online, very basic stuff. And her discovery, her insight, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but it was new to me at the time, was that when students do that, when it goes up there, is online up there? Sideways, down, anyway, when it goes online, so that the public can see it, so that anyone can see it, students take more care over their English and how they do it. They give it more thought, more concentration, more engagement than almost anything else. So we want to encourage that. We want to encourage our students to post little things online, like the famous YouTubers that we all know about. We want to say to them, make a little video, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes maximum, make a little video, put it online, of course unlisted and things like that, so that all the class can see it. Because we reckon that when students do that, they do it with more mind and heart than if they don't. But you'll notice it's called video option. In other words, I don't insist on this. We don't insist on this. We just think it's a damn good idea. Oh, there's one last thing, which is, in particular, my colleague Jane Ravel is very keen on getting students to have little moments of breakout, little moments where they can just snap off for a second, do something. So there's lots of little take a break activities to keep them engaged and with us and so on. So that's basically it. And the next thing is to ask questions and answer questions, except, of course, this is a recording. So I can't hear your questions, obviously, and so I can't answer them. But Nicole can. So if you want to know more about Jetstream, get in touch with English Central and ask them. And if there are questions to do with pedagogy and stuff that they find difficult answering because of not being able to talk to us at the moment, they'll pass the questions on to us. For me, being involved in course book writing again, for the first time in over a decade, has been fascinating because the world's changed. And since the world has changed, so have course books changed, have to change. No longer can we keep everything inside the covers. On the contrary, we have to sometimes open the covers up and let students fly. And they do that through getting up and talking and moving around the classroom. They get that from sharing their stories. They get that from always being the center of attention at the beginning of a lesson. And crucially, they get that by letting them explore online and get richer knowledge, more and more knowledge of the topics we introduce and offer for them. And what we hope is that teachers will find this attractive and grown up and enjoyable. But in the end, well, the real test is whether you like the topics. We think we've chosen topics that are really useful, really productive, really interesting for students of English. And we've done it now. There's nothing we can do. It's up to you, really, whether you agree with us, whether you think the topics are good and fun and done in the right way. I hope you like them. I hope you like the book, obviously. And thank you very much for watching this webinar.